This July, we're taking life seriously. Cardiac arrest is scary and more common than you might think. Did you know that every year nearly 9 million people will experience a cardiac event outside of hospital? Would you know what to do? I'm Australian actor Steve Bastoni, and I'm urging everyone to learn CPR as part of our Don't Die July campaign. Visit don'tdiejuly.com and sign up today, because you can't put a price on life.
Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. And here on the Muckrakers, we shine a light on those issues that really matter to you, shining more light and less heat. And, well, talking about heat, on Friday, the whole world collapsed, didn't it, with this IT outage? Well, we're going to do a deep dive into all of that today. But also shocking news. Well, sort of shocking for people over the weekend. Joe Biden, he said it's bye-bye Biden. And you will recall that here on the Muckrakers, we had a little competition to say what would last longer, Biden's presidential campaign or the orange. Well, I can tell you that the orange survived. And the person, we a bit of modification. Any resemblance to presidents past, present or future is purely coincidental. But the orange was the last to run out of juice. Joe Biden is no more. And before we get any further, let me introduce you to my two wonderful Muckraker companions today. We have Johnny Vedmore, who's a brilliant investigative journalism. I love all of his stuff. And if you hadn't had a look at that, go and do a deep dive into that. But also he's a fellow TNT Titan. And we're also joined all the way over, and I've been talking about his name because everybody gets it wrong, but we're not going to get it wrong. It's Ehden Biber, but no relation, he says, but he'd love to have been really. Is that true?
It's true. All true.
it's all totally true. And you're speaking to us from Russia. First of all, let me get both of your reactions to the resignation. Not surprising, as I say, we did have that competition and delighted that the orange won, and further victories, I predict. Give us your reaction, Ehden.
Based on the signature that I've seen, he signed it while he was sleeping, most likely.
Yeah, you did. And what was interesting, he didn't do it in an official notepaper or anything. He tweeted it, didn't he? And it all went out there, and everybody sort of came out to support him. And he endorsed Kamala Harris as well. Well, what's your take on it, Johnny?
I think it unraveled so much, it just kept unraveling. The Biden presidency was just like at the end of the roll, and it ran out of room. And that little poof that came out, poof of a tweet, of a post that signifies the end, is exactly, can sum up the Biden presidency. It was nothing really and ends with nothing too. And this is going to be an interesting time. I mean, I would say to the right, be very careful celebrating before you see what comes next.
Yeah, it is interesting. He says in his tweet, it's the best decision I've made is to pick Kamala Harris, even though he got her name wrong and introduced her as Trump a few times. Today, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be nominee of our party. Well, that would be interesting. We bounced all sorts of names about here on the Muckrakers, not least Michelle Obama, and possibly making her come back. What I found interesting is Nancy Pelosi, who was there with a dagger for most of the last few days. She came out singing his praises. His legacy of vision, values, and leadership make him one of the most consequential presidents in American history. And good old Donald on his Trump social or Truth Social, he was equally endorsing crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was. Well, thank you for that endorsement. All good stuff. We will unpack that more over the relevant period. I do want to look, however, at the events on Friday. And before getting into that, I've seen lots of your things. You've been a regular, Ehden, on TNT, and you've talked about all sorts of things. But your background is particularly relevant to this. Fill me in on your background.
So I've been working in information security for quite a long time. I mean, longer time that I would like to recognize. My background is did it since the age of 18 in the Israeli army, worked in multiple organizations, was the Europe, Middle East and Africa information security officer for Merck, which is a big pharmaceutical company called MSD in Europe. I worked as a manager in Deloitte, was the head of information security of Metrobank, consultant to Financial Institute. I've been doing it for a long time.
And that's the interesting thing. I mean, you're based in Russia now, and all of these people, they basically took down airlines, it took down broadcasters, it took down banking systems, all of those sort of things. Talk to me, and I've read your fantastic piece on Substack, and I would recommend that people go and do a deeper dive into that. But in terms of how this normally works, talk us through how updates, because that's what it was blamed on, how does this normally happen, and why are they not tested to make sure that things don't fall over?
So change management is a key element in when you have a system lifecycle. When you have a system that has a life cycle, you send update to it throughout the time. It requires updates. So the change management is extremely important. Now, in the past, when changes were introduced, the process would describe it more or less as a manual. You have a developer who would write a code, he would pass it to the testers would run testing on it, try to see if it's okay. Any change, it's not only a code, any change that you want to do, testers would test it. Then it would go to a committee who would get an approval to go to a quality assurance phase. And the quality assurance phase would check it versus a bigger set of scenarios to make sure that they don't miss anything. And then you go through the distribution. Now, when it goes through the distribution, usually you inform your clients, and your clients perform validation to try to make sure that everything is okay, there's no problem with it. And then when they check things, then they push it to their environment. So that's a normal old way style of things. Now, in the age of as technology have evolved and as changes became rapid and constant, there was a new approach to software development that we call it the DevOps approach. And in it, we talk more about continuous integration and continuous deployment of changes. And what it means is that instead of you doing it in a manual way, you automate the process. So when somebody writes a code, he can commit the change into a system, and that system would take this code, run the compilation on their behalf, check the validation, run all the tests, all the process would go. And if the results are okay, then it would go into a state of needs to be signed up for approval and then being sent. That's in a very, very short, trying to describe it. Now, what you have when companies are running those things, they also have something which we call a continuous security. You want to make sure that security would be all the time. So the security team and the risk management team of an organization would develop different risk scenarios to make sure that the risk team would develop different risk scenarios to see what could go wrong, and then they would implement controls to make sure that would not going to happen. What we saw this time is one of those things that one of the biggest problems that you have is that what we had here is a a system that is by CrowdStrike, which is running as a driver on your computer. Now, normal code would run in an isolated mode, so it doesn't really have access to a lot of things. It needs to call the operating system. It doesn't have access to other programs directly. A driver would have much more elevated rights, and because it has this privilege, it also have the ability to cause more harm. So when you have a system, when you have a code like that, any changes to that you introduce a big risk. So when you have a situation like that, when you are updating any update to this application, whether it's a configuration change or an actual system change, we need to go through a process of rigorous validation. And what we had here, there seems to have been no validation whatsoever. It has been pushed, and it has been pushed it was pushed as an update without the clients even having the opportunity to say, well, I don't want this thing to run. I would wait for the next update. So that has been the most.
Just to be clear on this, because it's good to unpack it, because a lot of people watching will not be IT tech in terms of that. You rely on these experts, and that's why it's so important at the beginning to put your expertise into perspective, because as you say, you've worked for major organizations. This is your bag more than anything. You understand how these things work. What I don't get is basically, as a principle, if you're turning around and say it pushed upon everybody, nobody has a shot to say click update here, which is normally what happens when we see about software. You say it was automatically put against everybody's system. Is that right?
Yes, it's right. And what was really strange, again, it's in a normal environment, like you would have, the organization would have the capacity to say, well, I don't want the latest update. I want to update the next update. This one was changed, sent as a channel update, which was a really interesting situation. And it was pushed worldwide. And usually you don't really have this thing. Usually you push into one region, then another region, then another region. This was just pushed to everyone. This was like a mega hit, and that is something that usually doesn't happen. And by the way, just in terms of background, I designed the anti-malware and security systems. I deployed, I work with vendors. When you want to introduce something like that into your system, a new security software, if you work in the information security team, you spend a lot of time with the vendor, understanding how do they do their updates, how do they validate their updates, who is vetting them. You spend a lot of time making sure that this kind of thing would not happen. And I can assure you that what we saw here is one of the key risks in CrowdStrike with regards to this product that would consider to be a key risk. So that key risk should have had control in place already for a long time. This is not a new product. This product has been launched about 11 years ago. So the idea that this has happened by mistake is extremely, extremely unlikely, almost as unlikely as what happened a few days before that with President Trump.
Okay, and I absolutely want to unpack that, because that's the theme of your Substack, is you're turning around and say, this was not an accident. Your claim is that this was deliberate and to cover up criminality. And I want to dig a bit deeper into that. But before doing that, let me bring Johnny in. What are your thoughts, Johnny?
Well, just listening to what was said there, I think what you can realize from the CrowdStrike, what was happened with this update, is that there seems to be an element that these big companies are now trying to manufacture consent to not give your consent. They're trying to make it or normalize updates that you don't know will happening. And that's a very dangerous step to we're walking down, because a lot of these big technologies like CrowdStrike, which are like almost, and one of the heads of the FBI said it, it's a company that's now too big to fail. A lot of these software companies are now too big to fail. So they have us over a barrel. They have they can force us to update eventually, and it starts off slowly. It starts off with, oh, do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? Okay, you have to have this one. Now, do you want this? Do you want this? Now you have to have all of these ones, and then there won't be any consent. Eventually, they're looking to have the rights to update onto your system how they would prefer, and I think that's a very dangerous route to take.
It is very dangerous, and we've had a number of technology companies in the spotlight recently, including Fujitsu with the post office scandal over here, and it does beg a belief about our reliance on technology. And even though I speak around the world as a futurist, embracing technology, I always warn people that they must have a plan B. I want to unpack this a little bit more. We're going to come back after these messages. We're going to look into CrowdStrike and also do a big deep dive into Ehden's theory about all the fact that this was not a mistake. Don't go away.
Anticipate potential delays for the morning commute. In other news, a recent government report on prescription drug pricing points to corporate
Freedom of the press is about your right to know.
Create offenses.
What are you talking about, man? Look at his stats.
Clark sheer athleticism.
It's about your right to be informed. Your right to access all types of information keeps us free as a nation.
No.
Today, there are real threats to press freedom.
Reaching residential areas by...
And your right to know about the world around us.
Look.
Some threats are obvious, some are easy to miss, but they all put our way of life at risk. We must defend against all of these threats, no matter what kind of news is important to you.
Justified putting American troops in harm's way?
That's a great question.
We must protect our right to know before it's too late. Understand the threats. ProtectPressFreedom.org.
Affordable housing, we can build that. Sustainable housing, we can build that. At MIT Modular, we understand the importance of housing for all and the importance of design, cost, and functionality. Our goal is to meet the needs of our growing population by converting shipping containers to livable units. If you're like-minded and in a position to invest in something meaningful and life-changing, we want to hear from you. We are a team of professional architects, engineers, and financial and tax experts dedicated to offering unique solutions that provide a brighter future. Our Opportunity Zone Fund offers investors both real estate and operating business diversification, 5-year tax deferral on capital gains, annual tax benefits, and ultimately tax-free appreciation potential. There are opportunity zones all over America. If you're interested in learning more about our services, need affordable housing, or want to participate in creating a new vision for tomorrow, give us a call in the U.S. on 385-985-5702 or read more at mitmodular.com. MIT Modular. We can build that.
This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm delighted to be joined by Ehden Biber, no relation, he tells me, and also Johnny Vedmore, who's all sorts of a relation to all sorts of wonderful people. We've been doing this deep dive into the rather shocking events which happened on Friday about this IT global breakdown where big airlines and broadcasters and various others were affected, and some broadcasters taken off air, airlines stranded, and so on and so forth. And the company behind this is a company called CrowdStrike. Now, we were just discussing in the break a bit of history of CrowdStrike. I thought it'd be useful, Ehden, if you can just talk us through it. Tell us about CrowdStrike.
Well, CrowdStrike was, if I recall correctly, was established in 2011. Now, CrowdStrike came to the knowledge of the. So I've been participating in multiple security events throughout my career, and I've met a lot of people from CrowdStrike. But they came into the public knowledge when there was this incident with regards to Hillary Clinton private email server. And the thing which was interesting about it is that the FBI, instead of doing an internal analysis of the email server, it was sent to CrowdStrike in Ukraine. So and so CrowdStrike seems to be now, usually when you have a situation in which the VP has a private email server that seems to have extremely confidential information on it, which shouldn't have been there, you don't send it to a private company unless that private company is connected to a free letter agency. And since the location was Ukraine, my only estimates would be CIA, as everybody was talking about it at that point of time. And I think it's very much so CrowdStrike seems to have a very deep ties to the intelligence community in the US, from my understanding.
Johnny, you've also been looking at CrowdStrike. What do you know about them?
Yeah, CrowdStrike, a very strange organization indeed. Of course, one of their biggest investors, as you would expect, is BlackRock. And you have a look at they partner up, of course, with the World Economic Forum and they're technology pioneers, as they're called. But they also have this very close relationship with the FBI. And when Google Capital started investing in them in about 2015, they put about 100 million capital drive into CrowdStrike. And they brought in more and more senior FBI executives, including Sean Henry, who was the executive assistant director, FBI's criminal cyber response and services branch, and former deputy assistant director of the FBI's cyber division, Steve Chabinsky. So they obviously have very big and significant connections with the deep state from the off. So it's not a surprise to see that they've had their fingers in all of the most controversial pies, of course. That's what they're just one of these companies who, of course, has links with the intelligence that are really worrying.
Yeah, and again, I'm very keen. What I always like to do is say we shine more light and less heat on these subjects, and it's good to see get alternative voices. But the one thing we have to do is question everything, because we're so reliant on experts, we're so reliant on technology, and it's those sort of questions which are not being asked, other than what we do on the Muckrakers, is to look at that sort of side. So we talked about the usual process. When you do an update, Ehden, you turn around and you say they do lots of testing on it before it's released to the public. Normally, what we're aware as consumers, you normally have to accept that. Two things you said is that basically in this particular update, there was no need to accept it. Why? Let's dig a bit deeper into that. Why would that be?
So when I looked at those two events, so when you have two extremely unlikely events happening one after another, you go like, okay, what are the odds of, I said, I wrote when I wrote on X and also on my Substack, I said, I'm not into conspiracies, I'm into coincidences. When you have two events which vary, the chances of them happening are just extremely low, and you ask yourself, okay, so what could there be any relationship between them? And you go like, okay, my view is like this: 85 to 90% of the US government is running Windows servers. It's a huge amount of service. Now, if you had information that relates to, and the last attempt on a US president that was that close was 1981. We're talking about 43 years ago. So, and at that point of time, when there was this assassination attempt, there was not a lot of digital artifacts or traces or that was created. We are living in a society where there's digital traces everywhere, and if you have an operation like that, it would be very much running using digital and information. And so, if somebody in the U.S. government, whatever branch, the deep state, whatever you would call it, were involved in it, they had to hide their tracks before there would be any official investigation that would say, seize everything, now we need to do something about it. And my view is that if you want to make sure that that would happen, you need to do it in a way that would not draw suspicions. You cannot just shut down the systems. Let's say the CIA is involved in it. Let's say the FBI is involved in it. You cannot just shut down all the servers of the CIA because that would draw attention, because if you're going to be an investigator, you would look at it. But if you have a global outage that requires you to do something which is extremely unusual, which happened this time, which is the only way for you to regain access to restart your system was to go into the system and start it in a way that there would be all the security stack that usually is there watching you, validating you, is not operating. You start it in what we call safe mode. So when you start a system in a safe mode, you don't have all those security layer in place. And at that point of time, you can do changes to the system that usually you would not be able to do. And you would be able to do changes and nobody would be able to know about it. And my view is that created a perfect opportunity. You create a huge distraction, and using this huge distraction, it allows you to remove evidence if there were any. And another point which I also want to raise is that some systems would run only in memory. So when you have an operation like that, if you have an illegal operation and you don't want to make any traces, you would create a situation in which if something goes wrong, you shut the system down. When it reboots, there's no evidence of that. There's databases, for example, that just runs in the memory. It doesn't write anything to the disk. So if you have an application that was running that was related to anything that relates to the assassination attempt on Trump, would it be databases, information, secure community applications, like communication channels that were designated to that? When you have an event like that and you have systems to just shut down and restart, and the only way is to restart them, you would be able to remove it and have no trace of it. So that is, and again, the timing is just so strange. The chances of this happening right now, just at this point of time, bypassing any security layer. There was one of the guys that commented on my blog was a professor of computer science and statistics from a university in the UK, and he says, I looked at what I did this. I have a consultant to banks. This thing is like a Chernobyl event that should not have happened. There's so many layers of security. We call security in depth, and we have multiple